Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and get things launched here. Thank you so much to everyone who is putting their affiliations and locations in. This is a really great group of people from all around the state, and I think that mirrors the reach of the Know Your Well program. So this is just fantastic. Welcome, I'm Jesse Starita, Public Relations and Engagement Coordinator for the Nebraska Water Center. This is virtual spring seminar numero uno. We're in our new world here in the coronavirus age, but so far so good. It looks like there's 40 some participants online. Again, thank you for joining us. This is our second to last seminar. So we have our final one on April 22nd. I'll just mention that again at the ending. But right now, I'd like to actually just tee up the panelists and the program for this afternoon's seminar. The Know Your Well program has been I think a fantastic success. And we're so excited to use this seminar as a way to talk about the different perspectives and levels of engagement. Christopher Olson, who will be first up on deck, has been the coordinator of the Know Your Well program for, I believe, 3, if not more years now. He is a current graduate student pursuing a master's degree in natural resources and environmental sciences at UNL's School of Natural Resources. And like I said, he's been the program coordinator for this program. And I just want to note that in 2017 and 2018, Christopher logged 17,000 miles driving around the state of Nebraska to meet with students and teachers in this program. And that's, he's not even a native Nebraskan, but he might as well be now. He's worked really hard on this program, so we'll hear from him first. Following Christopher will be Laura, I hope I got this right, Laura Goracke, who is a high school science teacher at Seward Public Schools. And she has served both middle school and high school students in both rural and suburban settings. She has been extensively involved in both the development and training of 3D instruction and the implementation of phenomenon-driven science. And she may talk a little bit about several of those things in her talk. And last but not least, Faith Santana is a freshman at UNL who is currently studying poli-sci with tentative plans to go into teaching. So that's great. I bet that makes Laura happy to hear. She attended Auburn High School, where she was involved in the FFA organization that has been critical to Know Your Well. And that organization is what ultimately connected her to this project. So I think with that, I guess maybe one final announcement, and I will just turn it over to the panelists after that. We will have some time at the end for Q&A, so you can be thinking about questions. And when you have one that's ready to go, please use the chat feature, and I will try to monitor that and relay it to our group. So with that, I'll turn things over to Christopher.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jesse. So today we'll be talking about Know Your Well and citizen science here in Nebraska. I'm just one of 3 speakers today. As Jesse has introduced us all. We'll start off with an introduction of what citizen science is and how it affects society. Why do citizen science here in Nebraska? The Know Your Well project, how it works. We'll also get to hear from a high school teacher's perspectives, point of view on citizen science and education, as well as her experience participating in Know Your Well, as well as a former Know Your Well participant, and what her thoughts are reflecting back on participating in Know Your Well. And we'll conclude everything with the results, data results from the Know Your Well project. So to start off, what is citizen science? It's generally the participation of general public in creating scientific information. You know, it's also a collaboration between professional scientists and non-professional scientists, the general public. It's also not driven by money, but it's driven by making intellectual contributions to better science, to better life, and to better society. So, what is citizen science? It's basically taking the limitations of professional scientists. There's far few, but if those few scientists reach out to the general public and train them how to collect scientific data, the general public can become citizen scientists and they can go out and collect scientific data. So the effects of citizen science, there's pros and cons to it. Pros are, it gets the public involved, and then as a side effect, the general public gets an educational effect. They get to learn about what they're doing. They also get better informed, just like in an ideal situation, in an ideal democracy, a better informed public, they make really good decisions when it comes to the ballot booth, the voting booth. So that's no difference to say also with science, because science is involved in voting as well. So when there's science involved in the booth, if the citizen scientists, they are well informed about the science, they can make better decisions. And here's an example of how those decisions come into effect in the society. Citizen scientists, they produce scientific information. They also interact with non-participating citizens from that are not citizen scientists, that they get to express what they've learned with their family members, their friends, their community, and that leads to their participation in decision making, which goes into policy adoption, the implementation, as well as the evaluation. It goes full circle, and the citizen scientists get to see the fruit of their labor in seeing society getting better, improving life. All right, so the cons for citizen science is that you can collect data, but what do you do with that data? So that data needs to be useful. It needs to be implemented. So the citizen scientists get that satisfaction if they see their data being used to better society. So collecting data just for the sake of collecting data it has this negative connotation with the participating citizen scientists, and that leaves a foul taste in their mouth in participating in science and their view on science in society. Issues with quality. So citizen scientists are not professional scientists. They don't have the years of experience. They don't have the specialized experience in academia with science in general. So there's always can we trust the information, the data that citizen scientists are producing? And lastly, a lot of times the scientists who produce citizen science projects don't know how to manage large projects, especially if there's a lot of interest from communities. And so there's a lot of volunteers wanting to get involved, and the professional scientists don't have much experience on how to manage such a project. And in this case, there's a bad experiences that can happen with citizen scientists, and again, leave a foul kind of experience and their perspective on science and how science is involved in society. So addressing those cons, the professional scientists have to realize that they've got responsibilities, and they need to fulfill those responsibilities in order to have a really good experience for the citizen scientists, in order to produce good quality data. Also, the quality of the data with quality assurance and quality control, there needs to be kind of reassurance that the data being produced is of good quality and it can be utilized. As well as if professional scientists struggle with face-to-face education and training, there's also other ways to get involved in education and training. And simple things such as developing guidelines in preparation to help citizen scientists have a good experience. So why do citizen science here in Nebraska? Well, there's many reasons, but one really big reason, an elephant in the room, is the dependency of Nebraskans on groundwater as their drinking water source. 20% of Nebraskans get their drinking water from private wells, and there's nearly 32,000 registered domestic wells across Nebraska. That being said, Nebraska is industrialized, has a very big industrialized agricultural scene, and that can lead to the use of pesticides and nitrates that can also affect the groundwater that lies beneath the agricultural activities. That can affect human health as we drink it. So what is Know Your Well? In a nutshell, it's basically a project where the citizen scientists are actually high school students across Nebraska, where the high school students go out and collect groundwater samples, and they test the samples for its quality. We start this Know Your Well project with 3 initial visits across all the participating schools. In this case, right now, we currently have 18 participating schools across Nebraska. If you'd like to learn more about each of these schools or which schools are involved, you can visit the Know Your Well website at knowyourwell.unl.edu. We're also on social media. We even have instructional YouTube videos on how to sample groundwater samples and test them for their quality. So the first visit includes kind of instruction and introduction to groundwater, its importance in its quality, but also on how the students can actually go about and finding wells around their community. And they use the interactive map found on the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources website, and they can find and click on specific wells, obviously registered wells, and they can get a lot of information prior to going out to the field in preparation. The second visit encompasses going to 1 or 2 of those wells that they've located near their school and introduce to them field techniques and sampling techniques. And we provide enough equipment for each high school to collect up to 20 samples. So they would use the first 1 or 2 wells and the training to continue collect on their own with what they've learned. And they collect 4 bottles at each location, at each well. 2 of those bottles, the samples that they collect, will go back with them to the high school to be tested for 13 analytes. The other 2 bottles will be going back to the water sciences laboratory to be tested by professional scientists for the same analytes and a few more analytes, so that there can be a QA, QC, quality assurance, quality control, to compare the results coming from the citizen scientists versus the professional scientists. Their visit is introducing the high school students to the chemistry kits they will be using. And following all the data that they've collected, they get an option to present their findings at location, at venues, either local or statewide. The samples that come back to the water science laboratory obviously don't get tested the same way. As the high school students use test strips as well as color comparators. At the water science laboratory, we use analytical instrumentation to get results. And in a nutshell, that is know your well and what we do. So I'll hand it over to Laura.
Thanks, Christopher. Can we hear me okay? Are we good? Just thumbs up or something from Jesse. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So as Jesse introduced me, my name is Laura Goracke. I am currently teaching AP Environmental Science, Physical Science, and then I was able to design a class called Water and Society based on my experience with this Know Your Well project. And this will be the second year that I'll be teaching that in this. When I say teaching, like next year, I hope we're back in the classroom, but second year that I'll be teaching that. And based off first year's participation, I have almost 30 kids that signed up to take Water and Society at Seward High School here in Seward. So I think that the Know Your Well project has really changed kind of my approach to environmental science. And as Jesse alluded, I have been pretty involved in the state training and facilitation of this transition in science teaching to what we call three-dimensional science. So instead of just focusing on content ideas, we're really trying to make sure that we're ingraining fluidly all the time science and engineering practices, as well as cross-cutting concepts coupled with that content stuff. So it's taking an approach that's very science-based. We want kids to be doing science and not just knowing science. And so that's where the Know Your Well project really caught my interest initially. I met Christopher a couple years ago and he told me about this, and I had just really been wanting to work with the program. And I was given the opportunity. I moved to a rural school last year just to be closer to family, and that school was quite a bit different than the Seward clientele. We had about 80 kids total in the high school, so very small Class D school, very ag-based, very rooted in what was going on out in the field when they were leaving the school every day. And so the Know Your Well project allowed them to connect that, and it made science really meaningful to them. So I think when we talk about Know Your Well, like why did we want this? Why did we push for this programming at Sterling High School, which was where I was last year? I wanted the kids to know more than just science content, as I said before. What I really wanted our students to do was to be able to synthesize. I want them to be able to analyze, think critically, and also communicate over scientific issues. And that alludes to what Christopher was talking about with citizen science. We want our citizens to be active participants in some capacity. And so the Know Your Well program allowed us to build that capacity with students as young as 14 and 15. So I think that that was something that was pretty powerful. The idea of water in Southeast Nebraska, if some of you guys, I was looking through the chat to see where everyone was from. It's something that I think we can take for granted. And so even as we introduced this concept to students, we started to get discussions stemming from things that they'd gone home and talked to their parents about. You know, for instance, the lithology down in Southeast Nebraska is really unique. So one neighbor could have 2 wells drilled, and the neighbor right by them can't get a well drilled because of the lithology. There's areas down there that you can't get the rural water down there because it's just really, really difficult to access those reservoirs. So it started to kind of bring up these conversations, and kids were starting to get really invested in it. They were invested knowing that at the time, Sterling had a lot of water quality issues in town. And so they were starting to really just think like, no, this isn't just something where we fill up our bottles every day. This is something that's really quite meaningful to us. So that's where we went with this. And it allowed us to engage with a lot of stakeholders across our community because we were now communicating out and discussing these things with not just in the classroom stuff, but with our school board members and our administrators, and also just community members who were involved in allowing us to come out to that. So it was just a very good way for us to kind of introduce a very global issue, and it brought connectivity from our students to science content, so it wasn't so disconnected. They weren't just learning about something in science class. They were actually being able to see that this was an issue not only in Southeast Nebraska, but worldwide. We could bring up political issues and all kinds of things that are stemming from this idea of water, but the Know Your Well provided that initial phenomenon for us to really investigate and go a little bit deeper. So just some local, I guess, frequently asked questions or results, if you will. We had about 35 students involved with it from Sterling. This was a collective effort between the FFA teacher, who was also new last year, and then myself. So I used my biology class, which was all sophomores, and she used her intro to ag class, which was freshmen. So 35 students is, you know, not a huge number, but when we're talking about a class D2 school, this was almost 50% of our high school population that was involved in some capacity with the Know Your Well project. And so to me, that was really powerful, because as I'll talk about later, I'll show you guys some things. The students found their niche in what their strengths were in terms of communication, or if they were a science student, they were really able to kind of get in and explore the science of this. But other students who maybe weren't necessarily strong suited in science grabbed onto the communication skills that we needed to make this successful, or the marketing, if you will. We had some kids who really ran with the marketing. So all 35 students had a role in this project. So the project itself was not limiting in any way to the number of students that could participate. We tested 6 local wells, and we could have tested 40 if given the opportunity. We just didn't have the time. Anybody in education knows that we just ran out of time, and this was about a 2-week span in May where we got to go out and do all the testing and all the analysis and stuff in about 10 days in the spring in a class D2 school with track meets. That's pretty good, because we had days where we only had like 2 kids there. So we were definitely working through that. There was incredible high local interest, though. We sent out an interest survey. That was part of one of the initial tasks for students, was to do an interest survey. And we had probably almost 20 plus, 30, almost 30. I was just looking again today. They responded almost immediately asking for more information, or if we could come test their wells. And so that was really reassuring to us. We were kind of worried initially that we would be shut down. We didn't know if, you know, this idea of water would be something that people weren't wanting to share, because we'd be on their land and you know, meddling in the waters, so we thought. But instead, we had a great response for that. Some of the things that we noticed when we got the lab results back from the university, there was some result variation in what our kids were able to accomplish on their end with the lab test kits versus what actually came back from the results. I do think that this was probably due to just the students' lab precision and accuracy skills. They were very green in terms of things that they had actually done, because none of them had taken chemistry or anything yet. So that whole process of them was very new, but also really valuable. It brought up ideas of, you know, why do we calibrate? Why do we have to be careful when we're doing these type of quantitative tests? You know, all those little things that help us become better scientists, they were able to start refining. And even through their errors, they were getting better at those things. So I know we did have some variation in what came back, but the process itself was very valuable, very valuable in that aspect. So this is some of the program extension that we did with this. Again, I mentioned earlier that it wasn't all about the science for me, because as much as I'd like to have people go into a science field, I know that's not the case. So the assessment pieces, we actually ran as an assessment pieces. We had different tasks that needed to be completed for, I'm gonna start this here, completed for different stakeholders. So we had marketing students who created these like social media graphics. And those went out to continue communicating things to the stakeholders and just through our school Facebook pages. We had some of our science geeks, and I say that with love in my heart because I too am a science geek, but they did all the number crunching and did all the data analysis with that. We had some of our communication kids write summary reports to school boards. They wrote thank yous to people who had allowed us to come out and test their wells. Updates to the administration along the way. And then the video that's playing as well is a final media team that put together a collective video of all of the process as we were kind of moving through that. So that was where we really got to see the outreach of citizen science. It became something that was very tangible for a lot of different students to find joy in and to find something that they're really good at and helping to kind of contribute to that larger whole, if you will. So that was kind of how we we kept going with that, with the intention of this program was still kind of running through at Sterling this year. Now I left, my husband's job brought me back to Seward, And one of the first things I did was start harassing Christopher and saying, hey, can we have this at Seward now? But it was kind of on its last phase. And so I'm waiting with bated breath for that to come back around so that we can jump on board with that, because the impact that I saw in 35 students was phenomenal, and what they were able to accomplish in just 10 short days. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the educational programming in general, because this was its first wave. And so some of the things that I noticed as an educator were the strengths of flexibility. Me as a science educator, I loved the flexibility of this. It let me go a lot of different directions. I was able to find my own anchoring examples with, where I was in Southeast Nebraska. I have some background knowledge in just some of the water stuff that's gone on in Nebraska, also due to my husband's job. And I thought that was really nice. It allowed me to go a lot of different ways. And the lab supplies and the materials that were provided were amazing. That is one of the biggest drawbacks of performing these kind of things in our classrooms, is it costs money. And the fact that we didn't have to worry about that, and there was enough for we had 2 groups go out every day, and there was plenty of supplies for us to do that. So that was an amazing strength of the programming as it was currently designed. We always want to talk about areas for growth. And so I see this being such an impactful program. I think the way that it would really take hold with educators is for a little bit of curriculum development, in terms of maybe always allowing that flexibility, but also having something that's a little structured in terms of what teachers want to look at when we're getting ready to implement into our classroom. We have a lot of things on our mind, and we're really worried about standards and making sure we're, attacking all those things in a robust way. And so to maybe have some type of curriculum development that aligns to the program and how it aligns to even our state standards or kind of these national benchmarks that we're trying to push for would be helpful for some teachers, but that takes time and planning and a team to do that. And I think along those lines, professional development for teachers to come in and experience what this all looks like, even prior to having those initial visits, is something that is really, really powerful. And it just allows a little bit more confidence. You're building capacity in your teachers before we're trying to build capacity in our students. And for people that maybe aren't necessarily well-versed in the environmental sciences field, I think that professional development, curricular development would allow most teachers to feel very, very comfortable implementing this. So, Christopher, I told you 10 minutes would be tough for me as a teacher. I could just keep going. So I will leave you with this before I hand it on to Faith. And I think this is a really good segue. In that video, I have interviews, and one of the most profound quotes that I got was this idea that a student said to me, actually getting to test something in our town. And, it makes me want to figure out what we can do to improve it. And she was talking about the water. And again, for someone who's 14 or 15, I think that's a really profound statement. We can see the impact that Know Your Well has, because again, that took them away from, I'm just simply filling up my water bottle, or I'm watching the water out of the irrigation and whatever the case would be in our fields, and to understanding that it is a resource that is so meaningful. And so I want to thank Christopher and all of his work with the Know Your Well, because it did provide this opportunity to 35 students in a way that they would not have gotten in any other scenario. So that's all for me. Faith, you're up, my lady.
Sweet. So like Jesse and Christopher said, my name is, and I'm political science and national security. I'm not sure what I want to do with that to the classroom in history, but we'll see. As a Nebraska resident, and FFA actually connected me to Know Your Well. So a little about FFA, it's intracurricular activity for high school students that's agriculture based. So there's leadership conferences and anything like that. And when it got involved with our FFA program, we got to bring it back into the classroom and get students involved with it, which was super, super cool. So it was actually the first time that Auburn FFA or Auburn High School in a whole had taken part in a citizen science project, which was really cool. And I felt really blessed to be able to be a part of that. but there was lots of uncertainty around it since it was the first time we'd done anything like this, about like if we're doing everything right and if we should be concerned about our results and how quickly we should turn back around to the persons while we were testing and tell them what we found, since, you know, we thought we were just high school students testing this. We weren't the professional scientists, and what should we actually do for this? Oops. And a lot of it came back to the integrity of our results. Is what we were worried about was, are we doing this right? Or did we mess up something in some way, shape, or form, or anything like that? From my personal perspective, starting the project is so open-ended. A love-hate relationship at the start. I had a passion for sciences in high school throughout all of my high school career. So I thought it was really cool to get that hands-on experience and in the classroom. And we actually did this over the summer. So we tested 20 wells and we had students in and out, but I tried to be at everything because I just really loved it and I wanted to run with it and do whatever I could with it. So we were able to test the full 20, and I turned around and made it into an agri-science fair project. That's like a science fair project, but for the Nebraska FFA Association. So I went to the Nebraska State Convention and presented some results that I found. When I started that project, I contacted Chris and asked him what I should present about it because there was so much that could be presented. And he basically told me, do what you want. And it was so open-ended and it made me so frustrated. And looking back at it, I was so used to black and white answers in high school and having everything like, this is the one way you should go with it, and this is the right way, basically. And with this project, it was more life application of there's so much you can do, but with it, and that there might not be one right answer, one thing that you have to do. And so I got frustrated at first trying to figure out, what am I supposed to present for this? What am I supposed to do with all these numbers that are just jumbled up in an Excel sheet at this point? And so I took time to sit down and go through the numbers and look for any correlation that I could find. And this is the thing that was most profound to me that I took and ran with. And it was the effects of anions on conductivity. So the ones that I focused on was chlorides, nitrates, and sulfates. Took all those, added up the numbers, tried to figure out the actual amount of anions in the water, and compared it to the conductivity, really to check for water quality for humans, animals, and plants, because each anion that I tested had different effects on all of those things, whether it was positive or negative. And I found that the higher the ionic concentration was, there was a higher conductivity, but they also operated separate of each other. So there was little things you could do to manipulate the nitrates and the chlorides and the sulfates in each type of water. So this was my final graph that I came up with after multiple trial and errors of different numbers. And you can kind of see in that graph the little relationships between the numbers, and that higher conductivity does in fact mean there's usually a higher ionic concentration. My final application was taking away from this is that it's so much more than just water science. I'm obviously not on the path to go towards anything in the natural resources or water science, but this is a project that I'm still super passionate about because of the critical thinking skills that it provides. And when Chris emailed me and asked me to do something sort of seminar with him, I was so ecstatic because it really played in my high school career, doing this and having that opportunity to explore that gray area. It probably won't be water sciences if I go into history and government, but something that Chris as well. And I feel like that's something that's super, super cool, that it might not always be the science that everyone thinks of the chemicals and numbers and things like that, but the way people think about certain things, which I thought was super interesting. And it also helped me realize that we have to be lifelong learners, willing to learn throughout anything. Like, I have to present all these numbers and I was so overwhelmed. I realized, if I just take a step back, listen to what Chris says about, it's a gray area, pick what you want, that's how it's going to go well. And so those were the biggest things that I took away from this project, and I really enjoyed it. And I think, like Laura said, there's so many good things about it that outweigh the maybe small, minute things that should be fixed or improved on it. That it's really helping high school students, and I'm here to say that it really helped me as well, and I know it helped a lot of my fellow classmates, and sounds like it helped people from around the state as well. So that's all I have. So I think I'll just.
Thanks, Faith. So Christopher, I think you're going to wrap us up, right, by presenting some results from the project.
Yes. Okay. So results, we're getting results from high schools, which is represented by HS, and from the Water Science Laboratory, WSL, which are used on the graphs. So in distribution of the data that's coming in, we used box and whisker plots with 90th percentiles, 75th median, and 25th and 10th percentiles. Here we have a graph with 7 high schools, each with a different color. For example, Auburn is in red at the furthest left, and there's 3 different bars. The one on the right, the bar on the right is the Water Science Laboratory for Auburn samples. The one in the center is from Auburn High School, the citizen scientists. And the one on the left is from Nemaha County, which is where Auburn is situated in. And in Nemaha County, the 25 samples that you see there in its distribution were collected from January 1st, 2014 through January 1st, 2019. And that's the same with every other county for these 7 examples. And you'll notice that the distribution of the data is incredibly similar across all 7 examples. The high schools had limitations with the kits that we provided. We didn't introduce any practices of dilution. So what they got is what they used. So their limitation was 45, for example, in this case, for the test for nitrate. And you'll notice that Auburn High School has 1 outlier right at 45. And then Auburn's Water Science Laboratory, that same outlier actually near 100. So that shows a bit of a difference in the results. This is for, if I go back, you'll notice that Auburn High School collected 20 samples and recorded 20 samples, and the Water Science Laboratory for Auburn tested for 20 samples. Adjacent to that, Central City High School, they recorded 18 samples and they submitted 19 samples. That last sample that was not recorded, high school students lose paper all the time, so it's a lost record. So we used with what they have. Here we have for schools the 143 samples that were submitted and recorded by high school students paired up with the same 143 samples. And the distribution you can see is incredibly similar to one another. Again, you can see the limitation of 45 milligrams per liter for nitrate for the high schools. It's the limitation at 45, you can see on the orange with the outliers, whereas for the Water Science Laboratory, it goes far higher. In comparability, our approach is utilizing the R squared. The R squared ranges from 0 to 1. Preferable if the number is closer to 1, it's more comparable. An example of that would be if the high schools tested 10 milligrams per liter for nitrate and submitted it to the Water Science Laboratory, and we also produced 10 milligrams per liter per nitrate as well. And since it's 10 and 10, the R squared for that comparison would be 1. So it's closer to 1 is preferable. You can see here for nitrate, for 10 schools that participated in 2017 and 2018, the R-squared is 0.4 on the top right-hand corner of the graph. And that was for nitrate. For calcium hardness, for the same 10 schools that participated in those 2 years was 0.4. For chloride, it was 0.4 as well. pH was 0.3, and electroconductivity was 0.8. The effects on, for the students, the tests that the students did for pH and conductivity, they utilized the same device to test for pH and conductivity. So why would there be a very large difference in the R-squared? And the thing dictating the R-squared, the difference in the R-squared between pH and conductivity is that the range is far smaller for pH. It goes from, I think the lowest record was 4.5 and the highest was, I think, 9.5. So there's a difference of 5 in comparison with conductivity. The lowest was 25 and the highest was 2,500. So it was a huge difference in range, which also dictated the results for R-squared. Comparability, there were some parameters, for example, copper, iron, manganese, where the instruments were incredibly different in sensitivity. At the laboratory, it went down to micrograms per liter, whereas the high schools used milligrams per liter. So to compare the two data sets, we had to use a range that the results were agreeable or not agreeable. So for example, the high school results for 0.1, for it to be agreeable, the water science laboratory had to have a result for that same sample between 0.5 and 0.05 and 0.15 milligrams per liter. And here we have an example for Auburn High School. In copper, they had 20 samples that were in agreement out of a total 20 samples. That's 100% in agreement. But for iron, they had 14 samples that were in agreement out of 20 samples that were turned in. So that's 70% in agreement. So if you bring that up for the 10 high schools that participated, you can see that manganese, the test kit for manganese, had 8 out of the 10 schools with 100% in agreement. But even still, the lowest percentage in agreement was 70%. It's still a very big number. The last parameter I want to discuss about is atrazine. They used Abraxas test strips. And you can see it's quite challenging. Here's an example of a test strip next to the instructions where you can compare. It's quite challenging to say if it's positive or negative. And the threshold for this test strip is 3 micrograms per liter. So anything below 3 micrograms per liter comes out negative. Anything above is positive. So out of all the samples that were recorded by high schools, only 2 came in as positive. All the rest were negative. Testing it here at the laboratory, we used the GCMS. We got the highest hit was less than 1 microgram per liter. So, and we tested for 18 different compounds. And here are the top 5 that got the most hits. You can see that this is the number of hits of samples that got 0.02 micrograms per liter or more. And atrazine, we only had 17 that had 0.02 or more micrograms per liter. So nothing really reached that 3 microgram per liter mark here at the laboratory, which shows proof of the efficiency and effectiveness of citizen scientists using these test strips. So my recommendation, utilizing these kits, there's a lot of high potential for human error. One student might think their sample looks more like, for example, in this case, nitrate, 18 milligrams per liter, and their fellow student might argue that it looks more like 10 milligrams per liter. So there's a huge difference between 10 and 8. And if you can change that from a human eyeball to make the judgment into a handheld computer photometer to make the judgment, it'll minimize the high potential for human error. So here are our references, and there's a lot of people to thank. The Nebraska Water Center for hosting this seminar, the Nebraska Environmental Trust for funding this amazing endeavor, and UNL to take on the research, as well as the 21 high schools from the 21 high school teachers from the 18 high schools that participated, and the numerous high school students and former high school students who became citizen scientists.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Laura, and thank you, Faith, for those really excellent presentations and set of results. And the presentations really complemented each other quite well, I thought. I didn't see that he was on the call, but I'm going to have to make sure that Mark Broman at the Environmental Trust gets a copy of this seminar so they can consider funding the program again in future years. There's really a lot of great stuff that has taken place the past few years. By my watch, it's 4:17, so we have a fair bit of time left to take some questions through the chat feature. And I see that there's already a few that have come in. Laura, Faith, and Christopher, you may be able to read it off your screen, but I think just for the benefit of the audience, I'll go ahead and just narrate these questions and then let you jump right into your responses. This is from Michelle Cook. Thanks, Michelle, for being on the seminar. She's with the Game and Parks Commission here in the state. And this question is for Laura. She wrote, you identified, quote, areas for growth, the curriculum development and professional development for teachers. What do you envision as a way to make improvements in these arenas, or is there already a team that are working on these?
Yeah, great question, Michelle. Christopher and I have talked about this, and I think the power of doing these kind of programs is that we learn and we keep getting better and better and better. And Christopher, make sure you jump in here just because I'm reiterating what we've talked about. But from my understanding, there is a team working on this. And I think that's what makes this program even more powerful, is that now we're getting education people maybe within the university that are being considered as important partners in this program. And so what that could look like is additional maybe, and I'm just spouting, but if I could like wave my magic wand, you have maybe graduate students or in education, or our education profs that are working on this. I would love to see some other informal educators in on this. So Game and Parks, even just some of our NRD stuff, some things that we can bring in from the local perspective, I think would be really powerful for the curriculum aspects of that, especially if we were going to disseminate something out to teachers, specifically in Nebraska. Nebraska is a crazy state. We have all these different like climates that actually, as we move through, and the lithology is different, and the way our groundwater is different. And so I think that if we could harness the power of multiple stakeholders, I think we could come up with a really robust curriculum that would allow the next Know Your Well wave to be even more powerful. Christopher, I mean, you know a little bit more about this.
Yeah, there's obviously I was part of phase one of Know Your Well, and there was a lot of hiccups and bumps on the road. We kind of worked with what we had. But yes, absolutely. Phase one is coming to a close, which was statewide. Phase two is currently going on, but it's only in northeastern Nebraska, where there's really high impact of nitrate in the water up there. But phase three is on the works right now, and it's going to be statewide again, and it's going to be involving more. We had interdisciplinary, interdepartmental work on phase one, but we want to expand that interdepartmental approach, including and focusing in on growing the education aspect of this project. So yes, absolutely.
Thanks to you both. I'll read a comment from Ashton Bowling too that she wrote that dovetails with this. As a teacher, I would echo what Laura said about the curriculum. We ended up doing a lot of our testing outside of school hours, which took up a lot of time. Having curriculum and being able to seamlessly integrate it into courses would be beneficial. But I think that's a great point for that discussion as well. Ryan Chapman, thanks Ryan for your question. Ryan's with the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. Does a lot with the water quality administration. He wrote, are there plans to continue or expand this program? We kind of touched on that, but Christopher, you might just develop that a little bit more. And if so, what resources are needed?
There's all the resources are needed and more. Yeah, it's still being planned. It's still being approached. I can't really give out much information, but we right now, for example, my recommendation, one resource was to switch over from color comparators, visual color comparators, to computerized, technology for it to make the decision. And that especially in this day and age, technology is advancing, and it's also becoming cheaper. So that's kind of one of the resources that we want, and we want to kind of expand on. We've already taken that approach on phase 2 up in the Brazil groundwater management area up there with schools participating up there. So we want to take this approach obviously on the scientific level with instruments that the students are using, but we also want to expand, possibly even make kind of help contribute to the creation of science clubs at high schools. A lot of the high schools that I've visited to, I think every single one of them are heavy on athletics and athletic activities, but there's no counterpart or complement to that in the sciences. So a science club where you get also hands-on, because athletics is hands-on. So a science club to get hands-on science experience, this is a great avenue to take that on. And that's taking it out of the classroom, but you can also put that back into the classroom and utilize that, not only in ag vocational classes, in science classes, but there's also math involved in here. So it's multidisciplinary approach. So multiple teachers can definitely get involved in making this kind of counterbalance to the heavy athletics departments that every school has, and also try to shine light on the sciences.
Because I have the power to do such things as a host, I am going to unmute Dr. Snow. Dan, I hope you have a microphone that you could connect to this seminar with, but you wrote something about the National Science Foundation proposal. Could you just talk about that a little bit and what you see as the next phase of the Know Your Well program?
Sure. I mentioned in the chat box that we submitted a proposal last fall to the National Science Foundation. That was to the Accelerated Science Informal Learning Program, and it included myself, Corey Forbes, Ashok Samal from Computer Science, as well as Dr. Ray and Mateo D'Alacio. We also teamed up with the Groundwater Foundation, which I think is a great match to this program. And it would include a lot of what Christopher talked about, trying to improve the students' ability to participate, and then really focus on ways that we can connect each of the student groups to each other and to us so that they can get a better handle on the science. So I'm really excited about that potential for the NSF proposal. And we're also talking about doing another NET grant in collaboration with several of the natural resources districts this fall that would allow us to continue to build on what was started in this first grant.
Thanks, Dan. And if folks do want to use their microphone to ask a question, I think that's totally fine. If that's just easier for you, go ahead and shout one out. Otherwise, the chat box is open and we still have a couple minutes for questions. In the interim, I wanted to ask one question just myself here. Laura, this is directed to you, but anybody can jump on. I thought it was interesting you mentioned about you had this notion in your mind that it would be hard or potentially hard to reach some of the private well owners in terms of, you know, would they participate or not? Mm-hmm. And I think when you told me that Sterling was a D2 school, I almost had the opposite impression that the community is small and in that sense so tight-knit that you might have a higher likelihood of buy-in from the people on those private rural wells. Tell me if that's I guess right or wrong, but also like who or what really enabled you to bridge that gap between students, high schools, and then the actual you know, private citizens?
Great question, Jesse. And it could be, you know, that's from my home area. And so I also have my old cowboy of a dad who's down there. And the other teacher was thinking about her dad. And we were thinking about this population, my father-in-law, this very like old school private mentality, right? Like, so initially our concerns weren't about us coming out. We were concerned about how willing they'd be for their samples to be sent back to the university, because I think sometimes, and I can say this because my husband's also a big go guy in the agricultural field, that there's this community misconception about what's going on in agriculture, right? Like it's us that is polluting the groundwater. We're the ones out there throwing the pesticides out there and the fertilizers, and we're damaging at this. And I think there's always that fear that we're going to be looked at negatively. And, you know, there's newspaper articles that we pulled up for the phenomenon that said things like Nebraska has the most polluted surface water due to agricultural practices. And so I think that our initial concern was that we were going to maybe elicit that fear in our citizens. And instead, like I said, we were blown away by their willingness to come forward and share. They wanted to learn too. And that's what a lot of them said. We want to know what's going on in our water. And so we were wrong in what we thought, and I'm really, really glad for that. And I was really glad to see, even as Christopher was going through results, those are the kind of things that matter. And when we come back out and we disseminate information back to our community, we can show that our agricultural practices have really, really, really come a long way. And again, that's just one more avenue that this program could take, is just community education. And I think that's really, really powerful, especially because I can speak from the perspective of Seward, which is not a big town, but we're still agricultural based, but we have, you know, practices that maybe are not great. And that's happening in our green yards outside in town. And so to connect that bridge between rural and suburban practices with our water, I think would be incredibly powerful. So does that answer your question? I think we thought that it would go one way, and we were really pleasantly surprised to see that it went the other way. So,
yeah, thank you, Laura. That makes sense what you said. I'll do this last question, I think, as we're getting close to 4:30 now. This is from Michelle as well, from Game and Parks. What is the best way to encourage our own schools to participate? Is it best for parents to reach out to science and ag teachers, or is it better coming from someone like Laura or Chris? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding and the schools are pre-chosen. We are in the York School District, Michelle writes.
So I try to take it from the high school students' perspective. So these high school students are doing the science. So I'd like to direct this question to Faith. What do you think, Faith?
I think, well, when Auburn got chosen, I'm not sure how the school itself got chosen. I know Chris came into one of our classes, and my teacher, Mrs. Bowling, just called down students and said, if you want to listen to this, come down and listen. And from there, we probably had maybe 4 or 5 students that were steadily involved in it. And then probably close to 10 that were bouncing in and out would be my guess, helping here and there when they could. We had it a little bit differently as Chris came in right at the end of the school year, and we tested over the summer. So it was a little bit harder to get students completely involved, since some had jobs and such like that. But the ones that, the 4 or 5 that I would say that were regularly there, were very involved as well. And pretty passionate about the project and what we were doing, because we just got to hang out and have fun with it too. While we took the testing seriously, it was a good time for us to talk about what was going on, catch up with each other, and things like that.
And Michelle, I just harassed Christopher. I said I had worked with him for a couple summers on different things, and every time he talked about it, I was like, so can we get my school involved yet? And, you know, I just kept emailing and emailing, and I know they were trying to kind of spread things out geographically too, and think about the type of school they were trying to work with. But from the teacher perspective, I just kept harassing. You know how teachers are. We're pretty good at getting what we want eventually just by bothering people, so.
In my opinion, if you target this targeted audience, so if you target high school students, you have to make it fun, and science is fun. And if you're targeting the high school teachers, you have to make it easy because they're already overburdened. So those are the best ways to get your high school involved. Is to, first of all, create dialogue with potential teachers and students, and then also have the kind of pitch point, like selling the pitch that science is fun, and it can be easy as well.
I think with that, I'll just tick off a few announcements and acknowledgements. First, since nobody, you know, clapping on Zoom is kind of weird, I'm going to raise a glass of water, which feels really appropriate, to our panel members, Christopher, Laura, and Faith. Thank you so much. It was, I think, pretty obvious that you put some real thought and time into preparing your remarks and your slides. And so thanks so much for that. We really appreciate it. We did record today's seminar on the cloud, so we'll just put all of our faith in Zoom, like the rest of our society is right now. And I will get this uploaded to the Water Center's YouTube channel later this week. That is youtube.com/Nebraska Water Center, just all one word. And I think this, the comments were great today. Thank you all for joining us. It was a really good group of people. And Dan Snow just wrote here at the end that he would encourage everyone to check out the Know Your Well website. I wholeheartedly second that. There's a lot of good information on there. knowyourwell.unl.edu, just all spelled out, no numbers or anything fancy like that. And you can also send an email to the team that way. So I am going to bid everyone adieu and invite people to join us for the April 22nd water seminar with Dr. Saurabh Pandey, and we will share details about that later on. Thank you all.
Thank you.